They told everyone I was in rehab, until I walked into their church with proof. My daughter screamed when she saw me walk into the church. Not because she was afraid of me, because for 6 weeks, everyone in that building had been told I was locked inside a rehab facility 3 states away. My mother-in-law was standing beside the stage with a pearl brooch on her jacket and a smile that could survive a funeral. She had one hand resting near the donation basket and the other wrapped around my husband's arm, like she had just won something. Then she saw me. The smile stayed. Only her fingers changed. They tightened so hard around Owen's sleeve that the fabric wrinkled. My daughter, Nora, was sitting in the second row between my husband and his mother. She was 9 years old. She wore the pale blue dress I had bought her for Easter, the one with tiny white flowers at the collar. Her hair had been brushed too tightly. I knew, because I could see the red mark behind her ear, where the comb had pulled. When her eyes found mine, she stood so fast the chair scraped the church floor. "Mommy?" The whole room turned. 200 people. Church members, donors, teachers, veterans, families I had known for years. Every one of them looked at me like they were seeing a ghost return from a place nobody was supposed to survive. My husband Owen slowly stood. He was a family attorney, the kind of man who could lie in a calm voice and make it sound like concern. "Grace," he said carefully, "you're not supposed to be here." My mother-in-law, Virginia Whitfield, stepped in front of Nora before my daughter could run to me. That was the first thing the room noticed. Not my uniform, not the folder in my hand, not the fact that I was standing straight after weeks of being described as unstable, dangerous, and broken. They noticed that my daughter tried to reach me, and her grandmother blocked her. Virginia lifted her chin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with that warm church voice she used when she wanted people to forget she was sharpening a knife. "This is exactly why we asked for prayers. Grace is unwell. She needs help." The pastor froze near the microphone. Someone whispered, "I thought she was in rehab." I looked at Nora. Her lips were trembling. Owen moved toward me like he wanted to guide me outside before the evening became something he could not control. But he stopped when he saw the folder. It was thick, blue, military issue. The kind of folder that did not look dramatic until someone understood what was inside. I stepped past him and walked to the podium. My boots made almost no sound on the church floor. Virginia gave a small laugh. "Grace, don't embarrass yourself." I adjusted the microphone. My hands did not shake. That surprised people more than anything. Then I said, "My name is Grace Whitfield. I am 42 years old. I served 14 years as an Army medic. I have never been admitted to rehab. I have never abandoned my child. And tonight, before this church prays for a lie one more time, I think everyone deserves to know why my husband put my name on a rehab form I never signed." The room went completely silent. Owen's face lost color. Virginia stopped smiling, and my daughter whispered the question that broke me more than any accusation ever could. "Mommy, was I bad?" I looked at her and said the only thing that mattered. "No, baby, you were never bad." Then I opened the folder. But to understand why that room went silent, you need to understand what happened before that night. You need to understand how a woman who had survived war, blood, and silence almost lost her child in a church full of people who thought they were praying for her. My name is Grace Whitfield. Before I became Mrs. Whitfield, I was Captain Grace Marlowe, United States Army Nurse Corps. I served 14 years. I learned how to stay calm while alarms screamed, while hands shook, while someone's life depended on whether I could think clearly in the next 10 seconds. That kind of training changes you. It does not make you cold, it makes you careful. When I came home for good, I did not want medals. I did not want speeches. I wanted a quiet kitchen, a daughter who felt safe, a husband who came home when he said he would. That was what I thought I found with Owen Whitfield. Owen was a family attorney in Charleston, polished, patient, the kind of man who remembered people's names after meeting them once. When we first met at a veterans charity event, he told me he admired how steady I was. "You make chaos sound manageable," he said. I laughed because I thought it was a compliment. Later, I understood he liked my calm when it served him. He feared it when it questioned him. For a while, I really did believe Owen loved me. Not perfectly, not bravely, but truly. He made pancakes on Saturday mornings. He read Nora bedtime stories in different voices. He once drove across town in a storm because I mentioned I wanted ginger tea when I was sick. Those memories matter, because betrayal hurts more when it comes from someone who was not always a monster. Owen was not cruel in the beginning. He was weak. And weakness, inside the wrong family, can become cruelty with a clean shirt and a soft voice. His mother, Virginia Whitfield, noticed that before I did. Virginia was elegant, respected, and impossible to correct without looking rude. She chaired church committees, hosted fundraisers, and made people feel honored while quietly deciding whether they belonged in her world. The first time I met her, she looked at my simple black dress, then at Owen. "Well," she said, "she certainly looks disciplined. Not beautiful. Not welcome. Disciplined." Owen touched my back and whispered, "Mom means well." That sentence followed me through my marriage like a warning bell I kept ignoring. Mom means well. You're overreacting. Not everything is a military operation. You always need control. At first, I tried to be fair. I told myself Virginia was protective. I told myself Owen was caught between two women he loved. I told myself families took time. Then Nora was born. And Virginia stopped pretending she only wanted a place in our lives. She wanted my place. Nora was 7 when the first real warning came. She had been getting dizzy at school, pale after recess, shaky after lunch. Once, her teacher found her sitting under the playground slide, holding her chest, and saying her heart felt fluttery. I did not panic. I documented. That is what I do. I wrote down dates, symptoms, meals, activity, duration. I took her to the pediatrician. The doctor referred us to a pediatric cardiologist. Owen said, "Grace, she's a child. Kids get dizzy." I said, "That is why we check." Virginia said, "Some mothers need their children to be fragile." I looked at her across my kitchen table and felt something in me go very still. 2 days before Nora's cardiology appointment, I received a text from the clinic. "Your requested cancellation has been processed." I had not canceled anything. When I called, the receptionist told me the request came through the patient portal with the correct credentials. That evening, Owen stood by the coffee maker, reading something on his phone. "Did you cancel Nora's cardiology appointment?" I asked. He did not answer right away. That pause was my first answer. "I thought we agreed to slow down," he said. "No, we didn't." His jaw tightened. "My mother thinks you're spiraling." I looked toward the hallway. Nora was close enough to hear us. "Your mother is not Nora's doctor." Owen lowered his voice. "You hear yourself? This is what I'm talking about. Everything becomes a mission." I rescheduled the appointment myself. Then I changed the portal password. That night, after Nora fell asleep, Owen came into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, he looked like the man I married, tired, torn, almost sorry. "I don't want to lose you," he said. I wanted to believe him. "Then stand beside me," I said. He rubbed both hands over his face. "You don't understand what this looks like from the outside." There it was. Not what is true. What it looks like. That was Owen's real God. Reputation. Virginia's approval. The clean family image people applauded at church. And when truth threatened that image, Owen did not protect truth. He protected the frame. A week after the canceled appointment, Nora nearly collapsed at school. The call came at 1:18 p.m. I remember the exact time, because I was restocking ice packs in the nurse's office when the school secretary stepped in, pale-faced. "Grace, it's Nora's teacher." I picked up the phone. Mrs. Ellison's voice shook. Nora got dizzy during music class. She didn't fully pass out, but she went gray. I mean gray, Grace. I've never seen a child look like that. The room narrowed around me. "Is she breathing normally?" "Yes." "Chest pain?" "She says it feels weird." "I'm coming." When I arrived, Nora was sitting in a small chair near the front office, wrapped in a school sweatshirt. Her lips had color again, but her hands were cold. She tried to smile when she saw me. "Grandma said not to make a big thing," she whispered. My hand stopped halfway to her cheek. "What?" Her eyes moved to Mrs. Ellison, then back to me. "Grandma said Daddy gets upset when I tell you about my heart." That was the moment the problem stopped being marital. It became dangerous. I took Nora to urgent care first, then called the cardiologist again. The doctor moved her appointment up and ordered a heart monitor. When Owen arrived home that night, he did not ask if Nora was scared. He asked why I had gone around him. "Gone around you?" I said. "You took her to urgent care without calling me first. She nearly fainted at school. She got dizzy. She went gray." You always choose the most dramatic version. Virginia arrived 20 minutes later, with soup in a glass container, and judgment in every step. She kissed Nora's forehead, then turned to me. Poor child. She never gets to simply be a little girl, I said. She almost passed out. Virginia gave me a pitying smile. Grace, when all you know is emergency medicine, everything looks like an emergency. Owen stood behind her. He did not agree out loud. He did not have to. His silence stood with her. Later that night, after Nora was asleep, I opened our joint bank account to check the urgent care charge. That was when I saw it. $12,000 had been transferred out. The memo line said, Wellness Deposit. The receiving account belonged to Harbor Renewal Center. I had never heard of it. When I asked Owen, his face changed before his voice did. That was for you, he said. For me? My mother found a place. A place for what? He looked exhausted. Not evil. Not yet. Just a man who had spent too long letting someone else write his thoughts for him. Grace, you need rest. I need my daughter's medical care taken seriously. You need help. The words hung between us. Not as concern, as preparation. What did you do, Owen? He looked away. That was when I knew there was already a plan. And once I saw that plan, I started seeing the pieces that had been placed around me long before the court papers arrived. The lie did not begin in court. It began in whispers. Virginia told women at church that I was still adjusting to civilian life. Then she said I was under pressure. Then, not quite myself. Then, refusing support. By the time Owen filed for emergency custody, the town had already been softened. That was Virginia's talent. She did not throw a match. She dried the room first. The custody papers arrived while I was at work. I was in the school nurse's office putting a bandage on a fifth grader's knee when the front desk called. Mrs. Whitfield, someone is here with legal documents. The boy looked up at me. Are you in trouble? I smiled because children should not have to carry adult fear. No, sweetheart, just paperwork. But it was not just paperwork. Emergency custody request. Mother's untreated psychological instability. Possible substance dependency. History of combat-related trauma. Refusal to seek inpatient care. Medical overreach regarding minor child. Potential emotional harm. I sat in my car during lunch and read those words 3 times. They had taken the hardest years of my service and turned them into a weapon. They attached a Harbor Renewal Center intake form with my name on it. They attached the $12,000 payment. They attached Owen's statement. My wife has become increasingly controlling and paranoid, especially regarding our daughter's health. I fear her military trauma is affecting her judgment. My husband wrote that, not Virginia, Owen, and that was what made it hurt. Because part of him knew better. He had seen me wake up at 2 a.m. to check Nora's fever and still go to work the next morning. He had seen me stay calm during emergencies. He had once told me, "You're the safest person I know." But in court, he chose a different version of me. A version that helped him win. That evening, he came home with Virginia behind him. They sat across from me in my own living room like an intervention team. Virginia placed a folder on the coffee table. "Grace," she said gently, "no one is trying to punish you." I looked at Owen. "Is that what you think this is?" He swallowed. "I think Nora needs stability. She has stability. She has fear." Virginia leaned forward, her voice low and firm. "This family has survived too much to be destroyed by your instability." That was the first time I understood her fully. Virginia did not think she was evil. She thought she was defending the Whitfield name, and in her world, a family name mattered more than the woman being crushed beneath it. I almost stood then, but I did not. That was the moment they were waiting for. A raised voice, a sharp movement, anything that could become another paragraph. So I stayed seated. Virginia watched me with satisfaction. "You see," she said softly, "this is that military control. You can't even let people help you." I looked at the folder, then at my husband, then at his mother, and I finally understood. They did not need me to be sick. They needed other people to believe I was. I did not need revenge. I needed the truth, so I began to collect it. The first temporary hearing lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes. That was all it took for a judge who had never met me to decide Nora would stay primarily with Owen until the full hearing. I was allowed supervised visitation twice a week. Supervised. That word did something to me. It did not make me angry at first. It made me feel hollow. The court-appointed supervisor was kind, but kindness does not soften the sound of your child asking why someone has to watch you hug her. Nora sat across from me in a small family services room with beige walls and plastic toys for younger children. She looked smaller than 9. "Mommy," she whispered, "Grandma said you went to a place because your brain was tired." I kept my face calm. Grandma was wrong. Daddy said you need rest. I do need rest sometimes. Everybody does. But I am not gone, and I am not unsafe. She looked toward the supervisor, then back at me. Was I bad? That question. Again. I reached across the table slowly, so nobody could accuse me of being too intense. "No, Nora. You were never bad." She nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks anyway. After that visit, I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt. I had survived mortar alarms. I had held pressure on wounds that would not stop bleeding, but nothing prepared me for watching my daughter wonder whether she caused her family to break. For a few days, the lie worked. The church stopped calling. The school placed me on leave after Owen's attorney sent a concern letter. People who used to trust me began speaking to me carefully, like one wrong word might prove everything they had heard. That was how reputations were killed by polite people. Not with shouting. With caution. With, "We just want to be safe." Then one evening, after visitation, I found Nora's drawing tucked into the side pocket of my bag. It was a picture of 2 stick figures holding hands. One was small, with yellow hair. One was tall, with brown hair and a blue shirt. Above the tall one, Nora had written, "My mom keeps people safe." I sat on my apartment floor and cried for the first time since the papers arrived. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, with one hand over my mouth. Then I folded the drawing carefully and put it into the front pocket of my evidence binder. The mission was not to destroy them. The mission was to protect my child. And if they wanted a fight, I would give them facts. That was when I called Hannah Brooks. Major Hannah Brooks, retired, former JAG attorney, sharp eyes, short gray hair, voice like a door closing. She had served with a friend of mine years earlier. I called her because I needed someone who understood both military records and family court. We met in a coffee shop near the courthouse on a rainy Tuesday morning. I brought the binder I had started. Bank statements, screenshots, the harbor renewal brochure, the court filing, Nora's canceled appointment, the patient portal login record. Hannah read in silence. Then she took off her glasses and said, "They're not trying to prove who you are. They're trying to create a paper version of you." I felt my stomach tighten. A paper version? She tapped the custody filing. Unstable veteran, controlling mother. Medical overreach. Refuses rehab. Dangerous judgment. They want the court to meet that woman before it meets you. I looked down at my hands. So what do I do? You do not fight emotion with emotion, Hannah said. You fight paperwork with better paperwork. Then she gave me 4 targets. Find who canceled Nora's cardiology appointment. Find whether Harbor Renewal ever admitted me. Find what happened at school when Nora nearly fainted. Find proof that Owen and Virginia knew the rehab story was false. Simple. Not easy. Simple. Hannah helped me request the Harbor Renewal file. She subpoenaed the patient portal access logs. She contacted Nora's teacher. She told me to write everything down. Not feelings. Facts. Dates. Times. Words spoken. Who was present. What changed afterward. I became what Virginia had always accused me of being. Controlled. Methodical. Quiet. But not unstable. Never unstable. 1 week later, Hannah called me late at night. I got the portal log. I sat up in bed. And? The cancellation request for Nora's cardiology appointment came from an IP address registered to your mother-in-law's home internet. I closed my eyes. There it was. The first tile. Not the whole floor. Just one tile, but enough to prove I had not imagined the pattern. Hannah's voice softened. Grace, this is not a misunderstanding. This is coordinated. Rain tapped against my apartment window. I looked at Nora's drawing on my nightstand. Then Hannah said, and I think Harbor Renewal is going to be worse. She was right. Evidence does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a fax from a bored receptionist. Sometimes it arrives as a password reset log. Sometimes it arrives as a teacher who could not sleep because she knew a child had almost fainted while adults argued about appearances. The first major record came from Harbor Renewal Center. They sent a packet through Hannah's office. At the top was an intake summary under my name. Grace Elaine Whitfield, age 42, Spouse referral. Recommended residential stay. Family reports emotional volatility. Possible dependency. Refusal of treatment. My throat tightened as I read. Then I reached the admission status. Never admitted. No patient evaluation completed. No clinical diagnosis issued. No consent form signed by Grace Whitfield. I read that line 3 times. No consent form signed by Grace Whitfield. The $12,000 had not bought me treatment. It had bought Owen a paper trail. The second record was the portal log. The cancellation of Nora's cardiology appointment had come from Virginia's home internet. The third record came from Mrs. Ellison, Nora's music teacher. It was only 1 page, but I had to read it sitting down. Mrs. Ellison wrote that the day Nora nearly fainted, Virginia had arrived at school first, not me. Virginia had been listed as an emergency contact by Owen without telling me. According to Mrs. Ellison, Nora was pale, sweating, and holding one hand over her chest. The school had wanted to call 911. Virginia told them not to. She said, "Nora gets anxious because her mother makes everything medical." Then she gave Nora water, sat with her for 12 minutes, and told the teacher she would handle the family side. But Mrs. Ellison did not feel right. That was why she called me anyway. I put the statement down and stared at the wall. For several seconds, I could not hear anything but my own heartbeat. Virginia had not just lied about me. She had delayed care for my child, so her story would stay clean. Hannah watched my face carefully. "Grace," she said, "stay with the facts." I nodded, but inside, something had gone very quiet. There are lines people cross because they are angry. There are lines people cross because they are afraid. And then there are lines people cross because winning matters more to them than a child breathing normally in a school office. That was the line Virginia crossed. Then came the fourth piece, the one Hannah had been waiting for, a voicemail. It had come from Owen's phone records. Virginia had left it the night before the first temporary hearing. Hannah played it once in her office. Virginia's voice filled the room. "She'll try to wear that calm face, Owen. Don't let it fool you. If the court sees the rehab papers and hears she's using Nora's health to feed her military control issues, you'll get custody. And when she breaks, everyone will know we were right." The voicemail ended. The office was silent. Hannah did not speak for several seconds. Then she said, "That is the sound of a woman who thinks she already won." I looked at the paused recording. Virginia had not confessed to everything, not in legal language, but she had revealed intent. Paperwork, custody, break her. Everyone will know we were right. That was enough to change the case. But the worst part still came from Nora. The custody evaluator interviewed Nora on a Thursday afternoon. Her name was Dr. Amelia Voss. She had a soft voice and glasses that made her look less intimidating than the power she held. She met Nora in a room with stuffed animals, child-sized chairs, and a box of tissues on the table. I was not allowed inside. Neither was Owen. Nora came out 40 minutes later, holding a small stuffed turtle. Dr. Voss had given it to her for being brave. Nora walked straight to me, then stopped. She looked at the supervisor. "Can I hug my mom?" The supervisor nodded. Nora ran into my arms and held on so tightly I felt her small fingers press into my back. Owen watched from across the hallway. Virginia was not supposed to be there, but she had come anyway. She stood near the elevator with her purse over one arm, pretending not to listen. Dr. Voss asked to speak to both attorneys. Not the parents, the attorneys. That was when I knew something had shifted. Hannah came out 20 minutes later with a look I could not read. "What happened?" I asked. "Not here." We drove to her office. She closed the door. Then she placed a legal pad on the table. "Grace, I need you to breathe before I tell you this." My body went still. Nora told Dr. Voss that Grandma Virginia made her practice what to say. The room tilted. "She what?" Hannah looked down at her notes. Nora said Virginia told her, "If anyone asks, say Mommy makes you scared when she checks your heart." I put my hand over my mouth. She also said Owen told her not to talk about the canceled doctor visit because Mommy gets confused about medical things. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, cars moved through downtown traffic like nothing in the world had changed. Inside me, something broke cleanly. Not in a way that made me collapse. In a way that made me stop hoping Owen had only been weak. He had not merely failed to protect me. He had used our child to support a lie. That was the moment I stopped grieving my marriage and started preparing for the truth. Dr. Voss's report did not accuse anyone of cruelty. Professionals rarely write like that. They write carefully. The report stated that Nora appeared bonded to her mother, anxious around paternal grandmother, and confused by rehearsed narratives regarding mother's alleged illness. Rehearsed narratives. Another clean phrase for something dirty. Then Dr. Voss included one quote from Nora. "Grandma says if Mommy gets me back, Mommy will take me away, because soldiers don't know how to be families." I read that sentence once. Then I had to put the report down. Hannah waited. I stared at the table. "My daughter thinks my service makes me less human." "No," Hannah said. "Your daughter is repeating what an adult put in her mouth. That is not the same thing." I nodded, but I could not speak. Because that was the thing Virginia had been circling from the beginning. Not the money. Not the church. Not even custody. She wanted Nora to see me through the same distorted lens she used. As a uniform. As a problem. As a woman who could keep strangers alive but could not be trusted to love her own child. That weekend, something else happened. Pastor Eli Morton called me. He sounded nervous. "Grace," he said, "I'm calling because your name came up regarding the Whitfield Family Values fundraiser." I almost hung up. "What about it?" "Well, the speaker we booked canceled. Hannah Brooks gave your name to the Veterans Outreach Committee." I closed my eyes. "Hannah, of course." Pastor Eli continued. "I didn't realize. Virginia has shared that you're unavailable." "Unavailable how?" The line went quiet. Then he said, "She told the committee you were in residential treatment." There it was. Not whispered in hallways. Not implied. Stated. To the church committee. To donors. To people who would decide whether Owen was a noble father or a lying husband. "When is the fundraiser?" I asked. "Friday." I looked at the evidence binder on my desk. Friday was 3 days before the final custody hearing. Hannah had not put my name forward by accident. Pastor Eli cleared his throat. "I understand if this is too sensitive." I thought about Nora asking if she was bad. I thought about Virginia blocking my daughter in a church row. I thought about Owen writing the words possible dependency in a legal filing. Then I said, "Pastor, I'd be honored to speak." He exhaled. "May I ask the topic?" I looked at my old dress uniform hanging in the back of my closet, still pressed inside its garment bag. "Resilience," I said. "And what happens when people mistake silence for weakness?" The church fundraiser was called Families Who Serve. That name almost made me turn around in the parking lot. Almost. Through the stained glass windows, I could hear piano music, soft hymns, polite laughter, the kind of warm public sound families make when they want everyone to believe nothing ugly has ever happened behind their doors. I sat in my car for 1 full minute with both hands on the steering wheel. My dress blues felt heavier than I remembered, not because of the fabric, because Virginia had used my service as a weapon, and now I was about to walk into the room wearing the thing she had taught people to fear. Inside, the program had already started. Pastor Eli's voice came through the speakers, slightly muffled. "We are honored tonight to support families who carry the burden of service." I stepped out of the car. The folder was under my arm. Blue. Plain. Thick enough to make Owen stop breathing when he saw it. When I opened the church doors, the first thing I heard was the microphone giving a small squeal. Then a chair scraped. Then another. Then the room began to notice me. It happened in waves. One person turned. Then 3. Then an entire row. Whispers moved across the sanctuary like wind through dry leaves. "Is that Grace? I thought she was away. Is she in uniform?" The piano stopped on the wrong note. That wrong note hung in the air longer than it should have. Nora saw me before Owen did. She was in the second row, trapped between her father and Virginia. Her hair was brushed too tightly again. I could see the red mark behind her ear from where someone had pulled the comb too hard. Her eyes widened. Then her whole face broke. "Mommy?" The word came out too loud, too small, too full of every night she had been told I was gone. Her chair scraped backward. That sound cut through the room sharper than the microphone squeal. Virginia moved first. She put one arm out in front of Nora. Not roughly. Not enough for strangers to call it violence. Just enough to stop a child from reaching her mother. And that was the detail people saw. Not the custody papers. Not the legal words. A grandmother blocking a crying child. Owen stood slowly. His face looked pale under the church lights. "Grace," he said, low enough that only the first few rows could hear. "You're not supposed to be here." Virginia recovered faster. She always did. She turned toward the room with that church smile, the one she used when she wanted cruelty to look like concern. "Everyone," she said, "please stay calm. This is exactly why we've asked for prayers. Grace is unwell." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone whispered, "Rehab?" I walked down the center aisle. My boots sounded steady against the old wood floor. Not loud. Steady. Owen stepped into the aisle as if he might block me. Then he saw the folder. His eyes dropped to it. His mouth opened slightly. He knew. Not everything, but enough. I passed him. The microphone hummed when I touched it. That tiny electric sound filled the sanctuary. I set the folder on the podium. The paper inside shifted. A soft, dry sound. For some reason, that was when Virginia stopped smiling. I looked at Nora first. She was crying silently now, both hands pressed over her mouth. Then I looked at the room. 200 people. Donors, church members, veterans, teachers, people who had prayed for a version of me that never existed. "My name is Grace Whitfield," I said. The microphone carried my voice to the back wall. "I am 42 years old. I served 14 years as an Army medic. I have never been admitted to rehab. I have never abandoned my child. And I am not here tonight to create a scene." A chair creaked. Nobody coughed. Nobody moved. "I am here because a false story was told in this church, and my daughter was made to sit inside that story." Virginia whispered, "Grace, don't." The microphone caught it. Everyone heard her. I opened the folder. One page. Not all of it. Just one. The Harbor Renewal Center letter. The paper made a small sound as I unfolded it. In a silent church, even paper can sound like a verdict. "This letter confirms I was never admitted to Harbor Renewal Center," I said. "The dates listed in the family court filing are false. I was at work. There are records." Owen lowered his head. Virginia stared straight at me, but her throat moved when she swallowed. I turned another page. "I will not discuss my daughter's private medical information tonight. She deserves better than that. But I will say this clearly. A mother asking doctors to evaluate documented symptoms is not instability." Nora made a small sound. Not quite a sob. Not quite a breath. I looked at her again. "No, baby," I said softly. "You were never bad." That was when the room changed. Not because of the legal evidence. Because every parent in that church understood what kind of lie makes a child ask that question. Pastor Eli stepped away from the wall and removed his glasses. Someone in the third row began to cry. Virginia's hand dropped from Nora's shoulder. Only then did Nora run. Her shoes hit the aisle. Fast. Uneven. Desperate. I stepped down from the podium just in time to catch her. She hit my chest and grabbed my uniform with both fists. "I knew you weren't gone," she cried. The microphone was still on. The whole church heard her. I held her with one arm and kept the folder in my other hand. Owen looked at us like a man watching the story he had built collapse in real time. Virginia whispered, "This family will never recover from this." I looked at her over my daughter's head. "No," I said. "But maybe Nora will." That was the moment the fundraiser ended. Not officially. No one announced it. But the donation basket stayed untouched. The piano never started again. And by the time I walked out of that church, with Nora's tears on my uniform, everyone in that room understood one thing. The woman they had been praying for had not been missing. She had been buried under a lie. 3 days later, we entered the courthouse. Virginia wore pearls. Owen wore a navy suit. Their attorney carried himself like a man who expected a clean win. I wore a gray dress, low heels, and Nora's drawing folded inside my pocket. The courtroom smelled like paper and old wood. Judge Caroline Reed took the bench at 9:03 a.m. She looked over the file. Then she looked at me. Then Owen. Then Virginia. "Let's begin," she said. Owen's attorney stood first. He painted the same picture they had been painting for weeks. A decorated veteran, yes, but troubled. A loving mother, perhaps, but controlling. A woman refusing help. A child caught in fear. He used calm words. Reasonable words. The kind that could make cruelty sound responsible. He said I had become fixated on Nora's health. He said I had resisted family support. He said my military background made my reactions difficult to evaluate. He said Owen had acted only because he loved our daughter. At that, Owen looked down at the table. Not enough for the judge to notice. Enough for me. For 1 second, I saw conflict pass across his face. Then he buried it. That was Owen. Always almost brave. Never when it counted. Then Hannah stood. She did not raise her voice. Your Honor, opposing counsel has described concern. We intend to show fabrication. The judge looked up. One word changed the air. Fabrication. Virginia shifted in her seat. Hannah started with the canceled appointment. The patient portal log showed the request had come from Virginia's home internet connection. Mrs. Whitfield? Hannah asked Virginia when she took the stand. Do you recognize this address? Virginia smiled. I'm not technical. That is not what I asked. Owen looked down. Virginia's smile tightened. It may be mine. The cancellation of Nora Whitfield's cardiology appointment came from your home internet connection. Did you cancel that appointment? No. Did someone in your home cancel it? I wouldn't know. Hannah paused. Mrs. Whitfield, you live alone. Silence. Small. Sharp. The judge wrote something down. But Hannah was not done. She called Mrs. Ellison next. Nora's music teacher looked nervous when she took the stand. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Hannah asked her about the day Nora nearly fainted. Mrs. Ellison took a breath. Nora was gray. Not pale. Gray. She was holding her chest and said it felt funny. Who arrived first? Mrs. Virginia Whitfield. What did she say? Owen's attorney objected. Judge Reed allowed the answer. Mrs. Ellison swallowed. She told us not to call 911. She said Nora's mother made everything medical and that calling emergency services would feed the problem. The courtroom became very still. I did not look at Virginia. I looked at Owen. His face tightened. That was the first time I saw him understand the thing he had helped create had moved beyond control. Hannah asked, Why did you call Grace anyway? Mrs. Ellison looked at me. Because Nora was scared. And because I knew her mother was a nurse. That sentence did not sound dramatic, but it landed like one. Then Hannah moved to Harbor Renewal. Their records director testified by video. No, I had never been admitted. No, I had never completed intake. No, I had never signed consent. Yes, the referral was submitted by family. Yes, the payment came from Owen Whitfield. The room did not explode. Courtrooms rarely do. But something shifted. You could feel it in the pauses. You could hear it in the way Owen's attorney stopped moving his pen. For the first time, the story was no longer flowing toward me. It was flowing back toward them. And for the first time, Virginia forgot to smile. The final blow was not the portal log. It was not the Harbor Renewal record. It was not even Mrs. Ellison, though her testimony made Owen stare at the table. The final blow was Owen. He did not mean to become the final blow. People like Owen rarely do. They believe they can stand just close enough to a lie to benefit from it, without being stained by it. Hannah called him to the stand after lunch. He looked tired by then. Not sorry. Tired. There is a difference. She began gently. You love your daughter? Of course. You wanted custody? I wanted stability. You believed my client needed residential treatment? I believed she needed help. Based on what diagnosis? He blinked. What? What diagnosis? I'm not a doctor. Correct. So what medical diagnosis did you rely on when telling this court your wife had a possible dependency issue? Owen swallowed. My mother and I had concerns. Concerns are not diagnoses, his attorney objected. Sustained, Judge Reed said. Rephrase. Hannah nodded. Mr. Whitfield, did any licensed medical provider diagnose Grace Whitfield with substance dependency? No. Did any licensed medical provider recommend residential rehab? No. Did Grace Whitfield ever agree to enter Harbor Renewal Center? He hesitated. No. Did you submit her name anyway? He looked at his attorney. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question, Mr. Whitfield. Yes. Virginia closed her eyes. Not from remorse. From calculation. Hannah picked up a sheet of paper. Did you authorize the $12,000 payment from the joint marital account to Harbor Renewal Center? Yes. Did you tell this court your wife was refusing treatment after submitting her name without her consent? Owen's mouth tightened. I thought she would eventually see that she needed help. Judge Reed's voice sharpened. That is not what counsel asked. Owen looked at me then. For 1 second, his eyes changed. It was small. A flicker. Almost a plea. Like there was something he wanted to say, before the room swallowed him whole. I held his gaze. Say it, I thought. Tell the truth, before someone forces it out of you. His lips parted. Then Virginia shifted behind him. Just one movement. One tiny reminder that she was there. Owen looked down. The moment passed. Yes, he whispered. But Hannah was not finished. She reached for her laptop. Your Honor, we request permission to play a voicemail produced from Mr. Whitfield's phone records. Owen's head snapped up. Virginia whispered, no. One word. Too loud. Everyone heard it. Judge Reed looked at her. Mrs. Whitfield, you will remain silent. The voicemail played through the courtroom speakers. Virginia's voice filled the room. She'll try to wear that calm face, Owen. Don't let it fool you. If the court sees the rehab papers and hears she's using Nora's health to feed her military control issues, you'll get custody. And when she breaks, everyone will know we were right. The recording ended. No one moved. The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioner click on. Judge Reed removed her glasses. She looked at Owen first, then Virginia, then me. For the first time in months, no one was interpreting me. No one was explaining me. No one was placing a story over my face. The truth was simply sitting there, documented and undeniable. Hannah spoke softly. Your Honor, this is not concern. This is a strategy. Owen stared at the table. Virginia's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Judge Reed turned to Owen. Mr. Whitfield, did you know the rehab narrative was false when you filed for emergency custody? Owen opened his mouth, closed it, then said, I thought Grace would eventually agree she needed help. Judge Reed's voice hardened. That is still not an answer. He looked at the table, then at his mother, then at me. Yes, he whispered. Nora was not in the courtroom. Thank God, because that yes was heavier than any shout. Yes, he knew. Yes, he filed anyway. Yes, he let our daughter believe her mother was gone, because it helped him win. Then Judge Reed asked one final question. Mr. Whitfield, who was being protected here? Owen did not answer. He could not. Because the answer was not Nora. It had never been Nora. Judge Reed sat back. Dr. Voss's report had already been entered into the record. She did not need to speak long. The written conclusion was enough. Nora appeared strongly bonded to her mother. Nora appeared anxious around her paternal grandmother. Nora had repeated rehearsed statements. Nora had asked whether she had been bad. That last line made the judge pause. She read it again. Then she looked at Owen. Then at Virginia. Then she said the words that ended the lie. This court will not reward a parent for manufacturing instability in the other parent. Virginia's mouth opened. No sound came out. For the first time since I had known her, she had no script. The ruling did not fix everything. Real life rarely hands you a clean ending. But it gave healing a place to begin. Judge Reed awarded me primary physical custody of Nora, pending final review. Owen received supervised visitation. Virginia was prohibited from unsupervised contact with Nora. The court ordered further review of the harbor renewal referral and the false filings. Judge Reed also ordered Owen to attend co-parenting counseling and prohibited both sides from discussing the litigation with Nora. Then she looked directly at him. And Mr. Whitfield, let me be clear. Your daughter is not a messenger, a witness coach, or a public relations tool. She is a child. Owen nodded. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Virginia did not nod. She sat stiffly, hands folded, pearls still perfect. But her smile was gone. After court, Owen approached me in the hallway. Hannah stayed close but did not interrupt. Grace, he said. I waited. He looked toward the elevators. My mother pushed too hard. I stared at him. That was not an apology. That was a transfer. I said, you signed the papers. His jaw tightened. I was trying to protect Nora. No, you were trying to keep from disappointing your mother. He looked down. For once, he had no polished answer. Virginia came toward us then, her heels clicking against the courthouse floor. This is not over, she said. Hannah stepped forward. Actually, Mrs. Whitfield, for today it is. Virginia ignored her and looked at me. You have humiliated this family. I thought of the church, the courtroom, the months of whispers, my daughter asking if she was bad. Then I said, no, Virginia. I documented what you did. Her face twisted. You always needed to win. I shook my head. No, I needed my daughter back. That was the last thing I said to her that day. Nora came home that evening. The house felt different when she walked through the door. not because anything had changed physically. The same porch swing moved in the evening wind. The same kitchen table had marker stains from homework projects. The same stuffed turtle sat on the counter, the one Dr. Voss had given her. But Nora walked in carefully, like she was entering a place adults might take from her again, if she touched too much. I knelt in the hallway. "You can put your backpack wherever you want tonight," I said. She looked at me. "Even by the couch?" "Even by the couch." She dropped it immediately. Then she ran into my arms. That night, we made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Nothing fancy. I burned one side of the bread because I kept looking at her instead of the pan. She ate half the sandwich, then climbed into my lap like she had when she was 5. "Are you still a soldier?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I was a soldier. I'm your mom now." She touched the sleeve of my sweater. "Grandma said soldiers leave." I closed my eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "Some soldiers come home," I said. "And when they come home, they still know how to protect people." She rested her head against my chest. "Did you protect me?" I kissed her hair. "I tried every day." She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I knew." That was the first night I slept more than 3 hours in weeks. The consequences came quietly after that. The church removed Virginia from the fundraiser committee. Pastor Eli called me personally and apologized. Not vaguely. Not with, "If you were hurt." He said, "I should have asked more questions before repeating anything." I respected that. Owen's law firm placed him under internal review after the court transcript became part of the record. Virginia did not go to jail. People always ask that. No dramatic arrest happened outside the courthouse. But consequences do not always wear handcuffs. Sometimes they look like empty committee seats. Unreturned phone calls. A church hallway going silent when you enter. A granddaughter who is no longer delivered to your house for unsupervised weekends. That was enough. Not because it erased what happened, because it stopped it from continuing. 6 months later, Nora and I planted rosemary beside the porch. She said rosemary smelled like soup and rain. I told her it was for remembrance. She asked what that meant. I said, "It means some things are worth keeping carefully." She thought about that. Then she pushed soil around the roots with both hands and said, "Like evidence?" I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Maybe not exactly like evidence, but in a way, she was right. I kept the first court order. Nora's drawing. The church program from the night I spoke. The harbor renewal letter that said I had never been admitted. The voicemail transcript. Not because I wanted to live inside the pain. Because for months, people had looked me in the eye and told me I was imagining what was happening. Owen and I are still learning what co-parenting looks like after betrayal. Some weeks, he does better. Some weeks, he hides behind short emails and legal language. He has apologized once. A real apology. Not perfect. Not enough to rebuild what he destroyed. But real enough that I did not throw it away. He wrote, "I used your service against you because I knew people would believe it. I am ashamed." I read that sentence many times. Then I put the letter in a drawer. I did not forgive him that day. But I let the sentence exist. Virginia has not apologized. I do not expect her to. Some people would rather lose access to the truth than admit they built a life on lies. Nora sees her father under supervision for now. She does not see Virginia. Sometimes, she asks questions in the car after therapy. "Why did Daddy believe Grandma? Did Grandma not like you because you were in the army? Can grown-ups be wrong even if they sound sure?" I answer as honestly as I can, without handing her more pain than her small heart can carry. Yes, grown-ups can be wrong. Yes, people can sound sure and still be lying. No, none of this was your fault. That last answer, I give often. Children need repetition, where adults created confusion. Life returned in small pieces after that. Permission slips, grocery lists, homework, Nora singing off-key in the bathtub, rain against the porch, a church I no longer attended. A new Sunday table with fewer people and more peace. People sometimes ask why I did not shout in that courtroom. The answer is simple. I had already spent years being described as unstable. I was not going to hand them the performance they had written for me. The truth did not arrive loudly. It arrived carefully. One document at a time. One voicemail. One child brave enough to say what adults had made her practice. My name is Grace Whitfield. I am a mother. I am a veteran. I am not the story they told about me. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that quiet courage still matters.